The history of libraries in Alberta begins long before libraries as we know them existed, and long before the province was founded. Alberta was just part of the unknown lands in the west. During the 1780s and 90s, fur trader Roderick Mackenzie established Alberta's first library in Fort Chipewyan on Lake Athabasca. Mackenzie's library was the first of its kind outside of Montreal, and became so famous that Fort Chipewyan became known as the Little Athens of the North. Apparently, the officers and gentlemen of the Northwest Company had little taste for light reading, for volumes on philosophy, history, and literature formed the bulk of the collection. One prisoner at the fort whiled away his time reading Shakespeare. This was also Alberta's first circulating library. Books from Fort Chipewyan circulated to traders at small, isolated fur trading posts. Reading helped to maintain contact with the outside world, especially during the long winters. The Journal of Daily Occurrences, kept at Fort Chipewyan, is the oldest surviving document written within Alberta. Now, in the provincial archives, the Fort Chipewyan journals are an irreplaceable part of Alberta's literary and historical heritage. When the Hudson's Bay Company took over the Northwest Company in 1821, the libraries of the two fur trade companies were amalgamated into one. It was an impressive collection. Virgil, Voltaire, and Milton were among the hundreds of titles. From its earliest days, the Hudson's Bay Company provided libraries for its officers and servants, and school books for their children. A selection of the best books published each year was sent out from London, and the books circulated from the established posts to smaller ones. Bound volumes of periodicals arrived at the northern posts well over a year late. The men of the Hudson's Bay Company were allowed to import small personal luxuries. Often, the parcels contained books, although there was one official complaint that Canadians preferred beer to books. Missionaries of many different faiths came to Alberta during the fur trade era. More books arrived for churches, missions, and schools. In St. Albert, Grandin House stands empty and deserted now, except for the chapel and the library. Some of the Oblate's books are still there, including an Encyclopédie Catholique and a catechism printed in Dutch in 1718. Church libraries are among the earliest special libraries in Alberta. The remains of another type of early library can be found in Lethbridge. Mechanics' institutes, which provided adult education for the working man, spread across the prairie provinces in the late 19th century. Perhaps as early as 1889, the employees of Sir Alexander Galt's railway companies had a reading room near the roundhouse. At first, the miners' reading room had only the foreign language newspapers from their homelands, but the library grew. The Lethbridge Miners' Library is now a social club, but in the basement, some of the bookshelves from the old library remain, containing titles such as The Coal Miner's Pocketbook and Social Democracy Explained. Most of the books were published in the early 1900s, and some of them bear the stamp reading Employers, Galt, Mines, Library. As the early settlers spread out across the province, the need for public libraries grew. One of the first of many women's organizations to respond to this need was founded in Winnipeg in 1890. The Lady Aberdeen Association for Distribution of Literature to Settlers in the West collected and sent out monthly parcels of books and periodicals. The parcels also contained copies of the Wee Willie Winkie, a children's magazine edited by Lady Aberdeen and her daughter. In 1903, the Aberdeen Association affiliated with the Victoria League in London, and eventually over 500,000 parcels of books were distributed free throughout Western Canada. Train invoices and correspondence tell us that as recently as 1931, boxes of books from the Victoria League were arriving in Alberta. For example, books traveled from London to Vancouver to Fort Macleod. Henrietta Edwards of Fort Macleod used the Victoria League's donations to form the nucleus of the library there. Like other small towns in Alberta, the people of Fort Macleod relied on donated books and volunteer labor to build up a library. The Fort Macleod Public Library made use of the University of Alberta's Extension Library, which, since 1913, has been the major source of public library service throughout Alberta. Librarian Jessie Montgomery organized the book service by mail and conducted reference services as well as directed reading by correspondence. During her 32 years on the job, Miss Montgomery became known as Librarian to the Hinterland. The Extension Library's welcome boxes of books have traveled to every corner of the province, and the demand has steadily increased. In 1977, the book stock was 80,000 volumes, and 8,000 requests for interlibrary loans were filled. Today, people in places like Peace River, Athabasca, Morinville, Three Hills, and Bear Canyon rely heavily upon the Extension Library. The Film Library is another extension service provided by the University of Alberta. It is one of the earliest Canadian film libraries, as well as one of the largest. The library, servicing the University of Alberta itself, began in 1908, when the university opened with 47 students and 5 professors. From a school on the south side, the university and the library moved to Athabasca Hall. Then, in 1911, into the new Arts Building. In the same year, the Legislative Library moved into its new quarters as well. These libraries, however, were for a special clientele, and in 1911, there were practically no public libraries to be found in the province. One of the greatest contributors to the establishment of public libraries in North America was Andrew Carnegie. He donated millions of dollars for library buildings, giving as his reason that he could not afford to buy books when he was a boy. Detailed application forms were sent upon request, and generous funds for library buildings were forthcoming. Alberta had 3 of the over 100 Carnegie libraries in Canada, in Calgary, Lethbridge, and Edmonton. Calgary was the first. The library was able to move from one room in the Calgary Herald building into the new library, which opened its doors in 1912. Alexander Calhoun, one of Alberta's most remarkable librarians, was hired to set up the library and acquire books. The library's annual grant was $10,000 from the city and $350 from the provincial government. Throughout his career, Mr. Calhoun made sure that the shelves were stocked with books for everyone. He believed that a public library should be the people's university. Mr. Calhoun was also the first to send members of staff away to library school, and throughout its history, the Calgary Public Library has had many fine librarians. In the first year of operation, librarian Ruth Hopkins formed the True Blue Girls Club, a reading club for young girls. During the Depression, the library was crowded with the unemployed and circulation rose rapidly. Librarian Lillian Vickerson, at the circulation desk, often lent patrons money out of her own reduced salary. Reference librarian Georgina Thompson became the answer lady for several generations of Calgarians. Louise Riley was children's librarian, as well as being the author of popular children's books. She also co-produced a well-liked story hour over the radio. Calgary's Carnegie Library, beautifully restored, now serves as the Memorial Park branch. Throughout the years, it has become known as Calgary's friendliest door. One of the Calgary Public Library's treasures is its first minute book. The Library Board had the Public Libraries Act illuminated on the opening pages. In the early years of Lethbridge, its public library occupied very cramped premises in the YMCA building. With the aid of Carnegie funds, Galt Gardens Public Library was built, and the library opened in 1923. Hazel Bletcher was the librarian in the Lethbridge Public Library for 33 years. She found time as well to help smaller libraries get started. One of Miss Bletcher's staff members has said that she has never known a fairer person. In Edmonton, as elsewhere, literary clubs and societies were among the forerunners of the public library, as here in the YMCA Reading Room in 1908. Strathcona, then a separate town on the south side of the river, built its library before Edmonton did. The citizens decided to raise their own funds, although they built the library in the Carnegie style of the period. The grand opening ceremonies were held in 1913. Premier Rutherford made the opening speech, and it is reported that he declared, "Hooray for sweet Strathcona." For a few years after the amalgamation of Edmonton and Strathcona, Edmonton had two libraries, and Ethelbert Lincoln Hill served as librarian for both. Then, in 1923, the Edmonton Public Library moved into one of the last Carnegie libraries to be built on the North American continent. In 1968, it was demolished. The 1916 accession book of the Edmonton Public Library records many interesting acquisitions. 10 volumes of Turgenev were purchased that year, all for $15.50, as well as a book listed as Dame Curtsey's Book of Salads, etc., at a cost of 38 cents. Edmonton's library is fortunate in its splendid Canadiana collection, but it also has a further claim to fame. Edmonton's trolley car bookmobiles were unique on the North American continent. Photographs of the library trolley reached as far as China. One observer called the bookmobile Edmonton's perambulating storehouse of culture. Early in 1914, the citizens of Red Deer decided to build their own building. The impetus came from members of the Horticultural Society. A library board was formed, chaired by J.F. Boyce, and donations were solicited from many institutions and individuals. Mr. Charles H. Snell of Red Deer served on the library board for 31 years. Mr. Snell recalls that many of the books were purchased from the drugstore, and when they needed rebinding, they were sent to England. It cost $1 a book for rebinding with cloth covers and leather spines. Mabel Besant became librarian in 1931, and 15 years later, her salary had risen to $50 a month. It was a real event for the Red Deer Public Library when Miss Besant, its longtime librarian, and Mr. Snell, longtime chairman of the library board, were married. Red Deer Public Library had many homes. It shared the premises with the RCMP for 13 years, moved to City Hall, and then to its present building in 1967. The Red Deer Centennial Library stands as a tribute to the citizens of Red Deer who cared about libraries and gave so freely of their time and money. Albertans living outside of the cities had an even greater struggle to obtain libraries. As villages and towns grew, it was the women's organizations who started the first libraries. In the early 1900s, the Alberta Women's Institute was particularly concerned about the lack of reading material available to farm families. The Women's Institute restrooms, found in towns for farmers' wives and children, were the nucleus of many later community libraries. At first, a few donated books and magazines were provided to be taken home free of charge. The usual membership fee became one donated book, and as soon as one library was established, books were passed on to start others. Money was raised through the traditional methods including bake sales and library teas. Wherever space or light or heat could be found at a low price or for free, the Women's Institute established their restrooms and later their libraries. Sometimes, space could be found in a store on Main Street or in the town hall, or often in the fire hall. Some early Women's Institute libraries were wiped out by the fires that engulfed small towns. Others closed during the Depression when there was no time or money for volunteer effort. These small collections formed the roots of many libraries we have today. The library in Alex, Alberta, was started in 1914 by another group, the Country Women's Club of the United Farmers of Alberta. Irene Parlby helped the library acquire donated books which were placed in the UFA Hall. When the hall burned down 2 years later, the Women's Institute took over and kept the Alex Public Library operating for the next 20 years. The Imperial Order of the Daughters of the Empire was another group that supported libraries. They adapted school libraries in places like Castor, Mundare, and many others. Some of the public libraries started by the IODE are in Killam, Rocky Mountain House, and Stettler. In Stettler, the library was established in the Palace Pharmacy in 1928. Money was raised through tag days, bake sales, and teas so that the library might continue. 30 years later, the library had moved to 2 bright, airy rooms above the club cafe, and the IODE had donated 4,000 books. In Camrose, in 1919, the Women's Institute and the IODE cooperated to pay the librarian's salary of $15 a month. Today, there is no doubt that many community libraries would not exist without the numerous hours of volunteer labor performed by women of the community. In Olds, cooperation among a number of women made the dream of a library a reality. Alberta's libraries are as varied as are the communities which support them. Balf, where the library shares a building with another recreational activity. Medicine Hat, Gleason, Red Deer, Vulcan, Airdrie, Raymond, Alex, Lethbridge, Coaldale, Calgary, Didsbury, Edmonton, Innisfail, and McGrath. Libraries are important to people everywhere in Alberta, even if the library has to be located in the town jail, as is the case in Daysland.